My name is Ryan Grayson, and until recently, I thought I understood my wife, Hannah, better than anyone. She was my rock, my partner, the woman who could make me laugh even on my worst days. We'd been married for 8 years, and while our lives weren't perfect, I believed we had built something strong, something lasting. But in the past few months, something had changed. It started subtly. A missed dinner here, a canceled weekend plan there. Hannah always had a reason, an important client meeting, a last-minute work trip, or a late-night conference call. At first, I didn't think much of it. She worked for a high-profile consultancy, and her job had always been demanding. But then the excuses became more frequent, and her behavior more erratic. One evening, I noticed she was spending a lot of time on her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. When I walked into the room, she quickly locked it and set it face down on the coffee table. My chest tightened as suspicion began to creep in. "What's that about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Work," she replied without looking up. "It's just a new client." Her answer sounded plausible, but something about the way she said it felt off. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice more things. Whispered phone calls, sudden changes in her schedule, and a lingering scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid, but the doubts were hard to ignore. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Hannah had told me she was meeting a client for dinner, but when I called her office to confirm, her assistant said she'd left hours ago. My heart sank. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I tracked her location using the Find My Phone app, something I'd never done before and immediately felt guilty about. Her phone was at a high-end restaurant downtown, a place we used to go for special occasions. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I parked a block away and walked toward the restaurant. The windows were large, giving me a clear view of the inside. And there she was, sitting at a candlelit table with another man. He was tall, well-dressed, and oozed the kind of confidence that made my blood boil. They were leaning in close, their heads nearly touching as they spoke. Hannah laughed at something he said, her smile wide and genuine. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen from her in months. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my fists clenching as I tried to process what I was seeing. The betrayal felt like a knife to the chest. I wanted to storm inside, to confront them both. But I knew I needed more than just a scene at a restaurant. I needed the truth. That night, Hannah came home late, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She paused when she saw me sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. "You're up late," she said casually, setting her purse on the counter. "So are you," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Work ran late. You know how it is." "Did it?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "Or were you out with someone?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" I stood, setting the glass down on the table. "Don't lie to me, Hannah. I saw you, at the restaurant, with him." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ryan, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because from where I was standing, it looked a hell of a lot like you were on a date." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. "I can't explain," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Not yet." "Not yet?" I repeated, my anger flaring. "What does that even mean?" "It means you have to trust me," she said, her tone pleading. "Please, Ryan, just trust me." Trust. The word felt hollow. How could I trust her when everything about her behavior screamed betrayal? I didn't know what hurt more, the possibility that she was lying or the way she looked at me, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Hannah slept beside me. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, as if nothing was wrong. But for me, everything had changed. I needed answers, real answers, not vague promises to trust her. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would have to find it myself. Hannah's words haunted me. "It's not what you think." What did that even mean? If she wasn't having an affair, then what was she doing? And why couldn't she explain? Trusting her had always been second nature. but now it felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, blindfolded. The next morning, Hannah left early, claiming she had back-to-back meetings. I watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street, my mind racing. I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I started with her phone. She had left it charging on the kitchen counter, something she rarely did anymore. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, half expecting her to burst through the door and catch me in the act. I scrolled through her messages, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just mundane exchanges with colleagues and friends. Her email was similarly unremarkable. It wasn't until I checked her calendar that I found something strange. An entry for the previous night's client dinner was marked with just the initials TM. It wasn't a name I recognized, but it was a clue. I copied the initials into my notes and decided to dig deeper. Later that day, I did what any suspicious husband might do. I searched for TM online. After a few hours of frustration and dead ends, I finally stumbled across a photo that stopped me cold. It was from an article about a tech entrepreneur named Thomas Morgan. He was a prominent figure in the industry, known for his connections to high-level government contracts. And he was the man I had seen with Hannah at the restaurant. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. If Thomas Morgan was her client, then what was she really doing at dinner with him? And why hadn't she mentioned his name? My suspicions deepened, but I knew I couldn't jump to conclusions. I needed more proof. That evening, Hannah came home looking as polished as ever, her smile bright but guarded. I tried to act normal, pretending I hadn't spent the entire day unraveling her secrets. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Busy," she replied, kicking off her heels. "Lots of meetings." "With TM?" I asked casually, watching her reaction. She froze for a split second, her eyes flicking toward me before she recovered. "What?" "I noticed the initials on your calendar," I said, forcing a smile. "Thomas Morgan, right? Big name. Must be an important client." Her smile faltered, and she hesitated before answering. "Yes, he's a major donor for one of our projects. We've been working closely with him." I nodded, hiding my frustration. Her explanation was plausible, but the hesitation in her voice told a different story. She was holding something back, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could wait for the truth. The following day, I decided to escalate my investigation. I took an early lunch break and drove to the office building where Morgan's company was headquartered. I parked across the street, keeping a low profile as I watched the entrance. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I hoped something or someone would give me a lead. It didn't take long. Around noon, a sleek black car pulled up, and Morgan stepped out, flanked by two men who looked like bodyguards. Moments later, Hannah emerged from the building, her expression serious as she fell into step beside him. They spoke briefly before getting into the car together. My chest tightened as I watched the car drive away. This wasn't just a business relationship. It was something more. The question was, how much more? That evening, I confronted her again. This time, I didn't bother with subtlety. "I saw you today," I said as soon as she walked through the door. She looked at me, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" "You and Thomas Morgan," I said. "I saw you leave his office together." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, setting her bag down on the counter. "Ryan, you don't understand." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, "because right now it looks like you're lying to me. Again." "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "Not yet." "That's not good enough, Hannah," I said, my voice rising. "I deserve the truth." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. "I know you do," she said softly, "and I promise I'll tell you everything. Just not now." Her answer left me reeling. How could she ask me to trust her when she was hiding so much? I wanted to believe her, but every instinct told me she was keeping secrets. Secrets that could destroy us. That night, as I lay awake beside her, I made a decision. If Hannah wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd confront Thomas Morgan myself. Whatever she was hiding, I was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. The decision to confront Thomas Morgan felt reckless, but I was out of options. Hannah's evasiveness had left me with no other choice. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, then I'd get it from the man at the center of it all. The next day, I called Morgan's office under the guise of being a potential client. After some back and forth with his assistant, I managed to secure a brief meeting with him, citing interest in one of his high-profile projects. It was a flimsy excuse, but it worked. The appointment was set for the following afternoon. When I arrived at Morgan's office, I was struck by its opulence. The sleek glass walls, minimalist decor, and the subtle hum of success all scream power. His assistant greeted me with a professional smile and escorted me to his corner office. Morgan sat behind a massive desk, his attention focused on a tablet. He glanced up as I entered, his sharp eyes sizing me up. "Mr. Hayes," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his smile practiced. "A pleasure to meet you. What can I do for you?" I hesitated for a moment, suddenly unsure how to proceed. The air between us felt charged, and I wondered if he knew who I was. Did Hannah mention me? Was he aware of my suspicions? "I appreciate you taking the time," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've heard a lot about your work. It's impressive." Morgan nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Thank you. We pride ourselves on delivering results." I took a deep breath, deciding to cut to the chase. "Actually, I wanted to talk about something a little more personal." His expression didn't change, but I caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Personal?" "Yes," I said, leaning forward. "About my wife, Hannah Grayson." This time his reaction was unmistakable. His confident facade cracked ever so slightly, and his gaze sharpened. "I'm not sure I follow," he said carefully. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice firm. "I've seen you with her, the dinners, the meetings. She's been lying to me for months, and you're at the center of it." Morgan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the city below. "Mr. Hayes," he said after a long pause, "I don't think you fully understand the situation." "Then explain it to me," I said, my anger rising. "Because right now, it looks like you're having an affair with my wife." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Hannah is an exceptional woman," he said. "But this isn't about an affair. It's about something much bigger. Something you don't have clearance to know." His words caught me off guard. "Clearance?" I repeated. "What the hell are you talking about?" Morgan sighed, his demeanor shifting. He walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file. "I wasn't supposed to tell you this," he said, "but since you've forced my hand—" He placed the file on the desk and slid it toward me. Inside were photos, documents, and what looked like classified reports. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages, my confusion deepening with every detail. They referenced Hannah by name, but not as a consultant or project manager. Instead, they referred to her as Agent Grayson. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "She's working undercover," Morgan said simply. "The dinners, the meetings, they're all part of a mission. I can't give you the specifics, but suffice it to say, it's important. National security important." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "You expect me to believe my wife is a spy?" "I don't expect anything," he said, his tone cool. "But it's the truth. And by confronting me here, you've jeopardized her operation." The weight of his words hit me like a truck. If what he was saying was true, then I'd just made a colossal mistake. But part of me still doubted him. Could this be a cover story? A way to manipulate me into backing off? "Why should I believe you?" I asked. "This could be another lie." Morgan's gaze didn't waver. "Because if I were lying, you wouldn't be walking out of here. Do you really think someone in my position would risk exposure for a story?" His confidence unnerved me, but I wasn't ready to back down. "If this is real, why didn't she tell me?" "Because she couldn't," he said. "The fewer people who know, the safer the mission, and her, are. But you've complicated things." I left his office feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. If Morgan was telling the truth, then I'd misjudged everything. But if he wasn't, then Hannah was still hiding something. Something that could destroy us both. When I got home that evening, Hannah was waiting for me. Her face was pale, her expression anxious. "We need to talk," she said. For the first time, I didn't know what to say. Hannah's words, "we need to talk," hung between us like a fragile thread. She stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the back of a chair as if she needed the support to stay upright. I set my keys on the counter and stared at her, my mind racing with everything I'd learned from Morgan. "Do we?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Or are you just going to keep feeding me lies?" Her face crumpled, guilt and exhaustion flickering in her eyes. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sneaking around with Thomas Morgan? What part of this is supposed to make sense, Hannah?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not what you think, Ryan. It was never about us. It was never about our marriage." "Then what was it about?" I demanded. "Because right now it looks like you've been cheating on me." "I haven't," she said firmly. "And I never would." Her conviction caught me off guard, but it wasn't enough to erase my doubts. "Then why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why all the secrecy? The lies? Why couldn't you just tell me the truth?" "Because I couldn't," she said, her voice trembling. "It's classified." I stared at her, my anger giving way to confusion. "Classified?" "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "Ryan, I'm not just a consultant. I work for an intelligence agency. Morgan is part of my mission." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Do you really expect me to believe that? That this whole thing is some kind of spy operation?" "It's the truth," she said quietly, "and I can prove it." She walked over to her purse and pulled out a small black folder. Inside were documents stamped with official seals, photos, and dossiers that matched the ones Morgan had shown me. My breath caught as I scanned the files, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "This is real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. "I was recruited years ago before we met. My role is to gather intelligence, build relationships, and uncover threats. Morgan is a high-value target, someone with connections to individuals we've been tracking for years. The dinners, the meetings, they're all part of the mission." "And me?" I asked, my chest tightening. "Was I part of the mission too?" Her face softened, and she reached for my hand. "No, Ryan, you were never part of the mission. You're the only real thing in my life. That's why this has been so hard. I hated lying to you, but I didn't have a choice." Her words hit me like a wave, leaving me stunned. If what she was saying was true, then her secrecy wasn't about infidelity. It was about something much bigger. But that didn't erase the pain of being kept in the dark. "Why now?" I asked, pulling my hand away. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Morgan told me you confronted him," she said, her voice tight. "Do you realize what you've done? You've put yourself and me at risk. If his associates find out who I really am, this whole operation could fall apart." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't considered the consequences of my actions. I'd been so focused on uncovering the truth that I hadn't thought about the danger I might be walking into. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We contain it," she said. "Morgan is loyal to his own interests, but he won't expose me. Still, we have to be careful. No more confrontations, no more digging. If you trust me, Ryan, you need to let me handle this." "Trust you?" I repeated bitterly. "After everything? That's a big ask, Hannah." "I know," she said softly, "but it's the only way to keep us safe." The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. I sat in the living room, staring at the documents she'd shown me, while she retreated to the bedroom. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. If her story was true, then our lives were far more complicated and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But if it wasn't true, if this was just another layer of lies, then I didn't know if our marriage could survive it. The following day, I stayed home from work, unable to focus on anything else. Hannah left early, saying she had a briefing to attend, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I wanted to trust her, but the weight of her secrets was too heavy to ignore. By mid-afternoon, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her again, not directly, but I needed to know more about Morgan, about her operation, about the world she had kept hidden from me. If I couldn't get the answers from Hannah, I'd find them myself. Whatever she was involved in, I wasn't going to let it tear us apart, but I also wasn't going to sit on the sidelines while she kept me in the dark. Hannah's confession had left me reeling, but it also left me with more questions than answers. If her work with Morgan was truly part of an undercover mission, why had she waited so long to tell me? And if I had jeopardized her operation by confronting him, what did that mean for her safety or mine? I spent the next day researching everything I could about Morgan, his business dealings, and his potential ties to criminal activity. Most of what I found was the same polished image he projected publicly: a successful entrepreneur with a reputation for philanthropy and innovation. But as I dug deeper, I stumbled upon whispers of something darker: unsubstantiated rumors of offshore accounts, bribes to foreign officials, and connections to shadowy figures operating outside the law. I couldn't confirm any of it, but the pattern was clear. Morgan wasn't just a businessman. He was playing a high-stakes game, and Hannah was caught in the middle of it. Later that week, I decided to tail her. It was a risk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still keeping something from me. She left the house that morning dressed in a crisp black blazer, her demeanor calm but distant. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, her touch brief but familiar. "Late meetings again?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Probably," she said with a faint smile. "Don't wait up." Her words gnawed at me as I followed her car through the city, keeping a safe distance. She drove to a sleek office building downtown. Not Morgan's headquarters, but another location I didn't recognize. I parked a block away and watched as she entered the building, her steps brisk and purposeful. I waited for over an hour, the minutes dragging by as I debated whether to follow her inside. Just as I was about to give up, she emerged, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his sharp suit tailored to perfection. They exchanged a few words before she got into her car and drove away. I decided to follow the man instead. He hailed a cab, and I tailed it to a nondescript cafe on the edge of the city. I parked nearby and watched as he met with a group of men in a private booth at the back of the cafe. Their conversation looked intense, their body language guarded. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I snapped a few photos with my phone, hoping they might give me a lead. When Hannah came home that night, I confronted her again. "I followed you today," I said bluntly, my voice steady but sharp. She froze, her expression shifting from shock to frustration. "You what?" "I followed you to that office downtown," I continued. "And then I followed the man you were with. Who is he, Hannah? And what are you really doing?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might explode. But then she sighed, sinking into the nearest chair. "Ryan, you have no idea what you've done." "Then enlighten me," I said, crossing my arms, "because I'm tired of being left in the dark." "That man you followed," she said slowly, "is one of Morgan's key associates. He's also the link we've been waiting for, the one who could expose Morgan's connections to an international arms trade." I stared at her, my stomach dropping. "Arms trade? Hannah, what the hell have you gotten yourself into?" "It's not just me," she said, her voice firm. "This operation is bigger than you can imagine. We've been tracking Morgan and his network for years, and we're close to bringing them down. But every move we make has to be calculated. One wrong step could blow the whole thing." "And me following him?" I asked. "Was that a wrong step?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Ryan, it was." The weight of her words settled over me like a storm cloud. My actions hadn't just jeopardized her mission, they had put her life at risk. I wanted to be angry at her, to accuse her of dragging me into something I never signed up for. But the truth was, I'd put myself in this position. My suspicions, my need for answers, had led me here. "So what now?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Now," she said, standing and meeting my gaze, "you let me do my job. I know you're scared, and I know you feel betrayed, but the best thing you can do right now is trust me." "That's easier said than done," I admitted. She nodded, her expression softening. "I know, but if we're going to get through this, we have to work together." That night I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was telling me the truth, but part of me still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more she wasn't telling me. And if I was going to protect her and myself, I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were tense, the air between Hannah and me heavy with unspoken words. She assured me she was handling the fallout from my confrontation with Morgan and the man I had followed, but her assurances did little to calm my nerves. Every time she walked out the door, I couldn't shake the fear that she might not come back. One evening, I came home to find Hannah sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand and her laptop open on the coffee table. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. The last time she'd said those words, my world had turned upside down. I sat across from her, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Things have escalated," she said, her tone serious. "Morgan's associates are starting to suspect something. They've increased their security, and they're asking questions about me." "What kind of questions?" I asked, my chest tightening. "About my background, my connections," she said. "They're looking for anything that doesn't add up. And after your stunt last week, they've started watching you too." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Watching me? What do you mean?" "I mean they know who you are," she said, "and they're not happy." That night I couldn't sleep. The thought of being under surveillance, of strangers watching my every move, made my skin crawl. I started noticing things I hadn't before. A car parked down the street that seemed out of place. A man lingering too long at the corner cafe. Paranoia crept in, and every shadow felt like a threat. Hannah, meanwhile, seemed to grow more distant. She spent long hours on her laptop, her expression tense as she typed away at encrypted emails and reviewed what I assumed were classified files. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it felt forced. The weight of her double life was taking its toll, and I could see it in the lines on her face and the exhaustion in her eyes. One night I confronted her. "Hannah, this can't go on," I said. "You're running yourself into the ground. And now these people are watching us? When does it end?" She looked at me, her expression softening. "It ends when the mission ends," she said, "when we have enough evidence to take Morgan and his network down." "And when will that be?" I asked, "because I don't know how much more of this I can take." She hesitated, then said, "Soon. We're close, but I need you to hold on a little longer." The breaking point came 2 days later. I was leaving work when a man approached me in the parking lot. He was tall and intimidating, his suit tailored perfectly. He stopped me just as I reached my car. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice low and even. "A word." I froze, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" "A friend," he said, "and someone who thinks you need to be more careful." "Careful?" I repeated, feigning ignorance. "I don't know what you're talking about." He smirked, his gaze piercing. "Your wife, her extracurricular activities. You've been stirring up trouble and some people are starting to notice." My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Mr. Grayson," he said, stepping closer. "You may not know the full story, but I promise you you're in over your head. If you care about your wife, you'll stay out of it." He handed me a card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. "If you ever want to talk," he said, his tone almost mocking, "give me a call." With that, he walked away, leaving me shaken and furious. Who was this man? And what did he know about Hannah's mission? When I told Hannah what had happened, she paled. "That's one of Morgan's enforcers," she said, her voice tight. "If he approached you, it means they're on to me. We need to act fast." "What does that mean?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "Act fast how?" "It means we move up the timeline," she said. "I'll talk to my handlers, but we have to take Morgan down before he takes us down." "Us?" I said, my voice rising. "Hannah, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be watched, followed, or threatened." "I know," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "And I'm so sorry, Ryan, but we don't have a choice anymore. They've brought you into this, and now we have to finish it." That night, as I lay awake, I realized there was no turning back. Whether I liked it or not, I was part of this now. And if I wanted to protect Hannah and myself, I'd have to trust her. But as the shadows lengthened outside our home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The following days were a whirlwind of tension and whispered conversations. Hannah spent hours on encrypted calls with her handlers, her tone urgent yet controlled. I stayed out of her way, trying to process the reality of our situation. Morgan's enforcers were watching us, and every move we made felt like stepping onto thin ice. Late one night, Hannah sat me down at the dining table, her face pale but determined. "It's happening tomorrow," she said. "We're making our move." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice low. "It means Morgan is meeting with his associates at a secure location," she explained. "We've arranged for a sting operation to catch him in the act, documenting everything and seizing evidence. But it's risky. If anything goes wrong—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. If they failed, Morgan wouldn't just walk free. He'd retaliate. Against her. Against us. "You're not going alone, are you?" I asked, my chest tightening. "No," she said. "My team will be there. But I need you to stay home, Ryan. Promise me." I hesitated, my instinct screaming against the idea of staying behind while she walked into danger. But I nodded, forcing myself to trust her. "Just be careful." "I will," she said, squeezing my hand. "I promise." The next morning, Hannah left early, her expression unreadable as she kissed me goodbye. I watched her drive away, my stomach churning with dread. I tried to distract myself with work, chores, anything. But my mind kept returning to the worst-case scenarios. What if something went wrong? What if she didn't come back? By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my car keys and drove aimlessly, my thoughts racing. I knew I should trust Hannah and her team, but sitting on the sidelines felt unbearable. Eventually, I found myself near the edge of the industrial district, a maze of warehouses and shipping docks that matched the location she had vaguely described. I parked a safe distance away and watched as sleek black SUVs pulled into a gated facility. Men in suits emerged, their movements deliberate and coordinated. I spotted Morgan among them, his confident swagger unmistakable. My heart pounded as I scanned the scene, looking for any sign of Hannah or her team. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A van screeched to a halt near the entrance, and agents in tactical gear poured out, shouting commands. Guns were drawn, and shouts filled the air as Morgan's men scrambled. I saw Morgan retreat toward the building, flanked by bodyguards while agents closed in. And then I saw her. Hannah emerged from the van, her movements quick and precise as she coordinated the operation. She wore a bulletproof vest, her hair pulled back tightly, and her focus razor sharp. My breath caught as I realized just how capable she was, how much of her life she had kept hidden from me. The operation seemed to be going well until I noticed a figure slipping away from the chaos. One of Morgan's enforcers, the man who had threatened me in the parking lot. He was heading toward a side exit, a briefcase in hand. My pulse raced as I realized he was escaping. Without thinking, I got out of my car and followed him. He disappeared into a nearby alley, and I ducked behind a dumpster, watching as he made a call. My heart pounded as I pulled out my phone, snapping photos and recording the conversation from a distance. "Package is secure," he said into the phone. "I'll meet you at the fallback point." I didn't know what the package was, but I knew it was important. Before I could decide what to do, the man turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted me. "Hey!" he barked, drawing a weapon. I froze, my mind racing. Just as he raised the gun, a voice shouted from behind him. "Drop it!" Hannah appeared, her weapon trained on the man. He hesitated for a moment before lowering his gun, his expression twisted with frustration. Hannah moved quickly, disarming him and securing the briefcase. "What the hell are you doing here, Ryan?" she demanded, her voice sharp as she turned to me. "I couldn't just stay home," I said, my voice trembling. "I saw him escaping, and Do you realize how dangerous this is?" she snapped, but her expression softened as she looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and relief. "Thank you, but next time, stay out of it." The aftermath of the operation was a blur. Morgan and his associates were taken into custody, and the evidence they collected, along with the contents of the briefcase, was enough to dismantle his network. The media exploded with news of the arrests, painting Morgan as the mastermind of an international arms trade. Hannah's mission was over. A week later, we sat on the porch, the weight of the past months finally lifting. She sipped her coffee, her posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Are you okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. "I think so," she said, smiling faintly. "It feels strange, like I can finally breathe again." "And us?" I asked cautiously. She reached for my hand, her touch warm and steady. "Us is what matters most," she said. "I'm sorry for everything, Ryan. For the lies, the secrecy. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said, but no more secrets. Promise me. I promise, she said, her eyes meeting mine. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And as we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.